is India Global. I'm Gaurie, Dwivedi. We now turn our attention to what's happening in South Asian geopolitics. Dramatic shift is underway. Bangladesh is increasingly looking eastward, seeking closer economic and diplomatic ties with China and other East Asian powers. The pivot comes at a time of rising tensions with its longtime neighbor and ally, India. Bangladesh's interim government and its advisor for foreign affairs, Touhid Hossain, is currently in Beijing, during which he will hold talks with his Chinese counterpart, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang. But as Bangladesh seeks to diversify its international relations, the relationship with India remains under strain. Tensions have flared over political instability in Dhaka, particularly surrounding the controversial exile of Bangladesh's former leader Sheikh Hasina, with the interim government under the fire amidst concerns over the safety of Hindus in Bangladesh. Diplomatic efforts have failed to heal the rift. The diplomatic and political crisis deepens with the ongoing issue of Hasina's extradition. Bangladesh has issued a formal request for the return of its former prime minister, who faces charges of crimes against humanity and genocide in the International Crimes Tribunal. Asif Nazrul, who is Bangladesh's law advisor, warned that India's refusal to comply would be a violation of the extradition treaty between the two countries. In fact, Bangladesh is now exploring international support to pressure India into handing over Hasina. The country has already issued a red alert for her return, while diplomatic efforts have intensified. Amidst this political turmoil, the interim government is struggling to restore law and order, following a violent student uprising that led to Hasina's ouster. As Bangladesh turns the gaze eastward, the shifting alliances and rising tensions with India are set to mark a pivotal moment in the region's political landscape. Let's get in Saurabh Gupta joining me live from Kolkata to give a sense of how things are looking right now for Bangladesh. Saurabh, every day there is fresh news coming in from Dhaka indicating that the nosedive that has happened in relationship with India, there seems to be no upside to it right now. In fact, the trip to China comes at a time when there's no effort being made by Mohammad Yunus's government to restore relationship with India. That's shocking.
Yes, it is, and if we've been following some of the agreements, some of the announcements that are being made during the bilateral visit, the devil lies in the details actually. Because if you see, there are two things that actually caught my eye. One is, of course, the river water data, sharing agreement. Now, that's something that's been a bit of a problem even between India and Bangladesh, even during the Hasina regime, and that is something that Bangladesh and China seem to be, moving forward on, whereas with India, that seems to be largely on the back burner. Even though, and one more thing to touch upon is that it's not as if Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina did not visit China. Even she did. But what seems to be the sense that one seems to be getting is that India was still very reassured about India's strategic interests, even with that visit. But in the current scenario, perhaps it would be a little more discomforting for those watching the India-Bangladesh relations space. Apart from that, another thing that seems to have stood out is this whole, exchange of patients or medical facilities, I beg your pardon, for those from Bangladesh in China. And apparently, hospitals are going to be designated in Kunming for Bangladeshi patients. And we know a lot of Bangladeshi patients travel to India for treatment. A lot of them travel not just to Kolkata, but also to cities like, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and, other places in southern India for treatment. So those are things also that perhaps one sees that China seemed to be making also inroads in those spaces. And till now, largely Bangladeshi patients would travel to India, but there seems to be now hospitals designated in Kunming, and also China setting up hospitals in Bangladesh, and also the fact that the river water sharing data agreement is something that again is something that has been a part of India-Bangladesh ties as well, but China seems to be moving in on that as well. So yes, there is a lot of concern in that space. For those who watch that space, these seem to be moves that China is making. Also, a concession on debt is something that is also being talked about. So all of these things are on the table, and this is why those who watch India-Bangladesh ties closely seem to be viewing these developments with some amount of concern.
Saurabh, Bangladesh also has very large amounts of Chinese investments. In fact, China is the largest investor in Bangladesh. At a time when the country needs money, it needs money to restore everything from law and order to its export industry. It's quite natural it will lean more to China. And given the fact that Mohammed Yunus's government has mainstreamed radical elements, has elements in his government which are almost anti-India, what are we really looking at going forward here?
Well, one got a sense from the Indian Foreign Secretary's visit to Dhaka that perhaps, the ties that really have nosedived, and you mentioned, at the top of that is, of course, the demand for the extradition of the former Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina. But there seemed to be a sense that other areas of the partnership, and the Bangladesh partnership, like we've been reporting on NDTV, is not just one issue. There are multiple issues and multiple sectors where this partnership takes place. For example, a few days ago, even when it comes to waterways, we had ships sailing, two places in Assam through Bangladesh waters. So it was seen as a step that perhaps the other sectors were not going to be affected so much. In India's strategic interests, perhaps there would be, still salvaged. But with these developments, many believe that it seems that the situation, whereas which includes India-Bangladesh ties and the strategic interests of India, seem to be in a slightly more complicated territory at this point, especially with this visit and the announcements that are being made during this visit.
All right, Saurabh Gupta, really appreciate you taking out the time to speak to us about a story that's so important for India's strategic calculus. Let's also now get in Ashok Sajjanhar, former ambassador, joining me on the broadcast. Good to have you, sir. Talk to us about the cozying up of ties between Bangladesh and China at a time when Mohammed Yunus's government is making absolutely no efforts or limited efforts to restore the long-standing ties between India and Bangladesh.
Yes, thank you very much, Gaurie, for having me on your program. You're very right, that this visit by Touhid Hossain to Beijing and his interactions with his counterpart Wang, they need to be watched with keen interest. You see, under normal circumstances, there would not have been any anxiety, if any of our neighbors are having ties with China. After all, China is the second largest economy in the world, $17 trillion economy, etc. And so, it would be somewhat natural for countries to have economic relations, vibrant economic ties with that country. Even Sheikh Hasina, as your correspondent Saurabh Gupta was saying, she had her government also had strong relations. In fact, defense relations also with China. But of course, there we were assured that our core security interests and strategic interests would not be compromised, that they would be taken fully safeguarded and they would be taken care of. Now, as far as the Mohammed Yunus government is concerned, that has come under a big question mark. And we know that as far as China is concerned, it is always fishing in troubled waters as far as our neighbors are concerned. It's trying to, the very strong connect between India, cultural, historical, linguistic, people-to-people ties between these countries and India. It has always trying to muddy the waters. And also the huge, the imperatives of interdependency that are there. Because we have seen in terms of the support that India has provided to Bangladesh, more than $8 billion, under the Neighborhood First policy. We have provided non-reciprocal, generous support, economic support in every sense. And we were assured during Sheikh Hasina's tenure of about 15 years from 2019 till August last year, that our, as far as our borders are concerned, as far as Indian extremists are concerned, they would
Indeed.
not be given refuge. So that is under a question mark. So we really have to watch this space very, very closely
Yes.
and take action accordingly as the situation develops.
And it also comes at a time when Bangladesh desperately needs funds. You know, its economy is going through a really bad patch. Its biggest money spinner, which is the textile industry, is facing a major slowdown. Its law and order is completely out of control. All that requires money, requires funds. How much do you expect China to swoop in to take greater control and leverage of the Bangladeshi economy?
Okay, there are two things here, Gaurie. You know, number one, China has deep pockets. And that is why we've seen, whether it is under its Belt and Road Initiative or its other programs, it has gone out of its way. You look at Pakistan, you know, where its strategic interests are involved, then, you know, basically those are strategic investments. They are not basically governed by economic considerations as to how, you know, certain projects are going to make profits or not. So it has the capacity. Number two is, as we saw in the case of Sri Lanka in 22, that it is not going to sort of, you know, go out of its way to help out a nation with very generous support. You would recall that in 22, it was India which had to come to the support, which had to come to the aid of Sri Lanka, although it was facing shortages, whether it was of energy, whether it was of fossil fuels, medicine, food, every sense of the word. It was, you know, it didn't have any foreign exchange reserves because number one, COVID-19 pandemic had hit it hard. And then number two, in 22, we had the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Yes.
And a couple of its industry, whether it is tourism or export of tea and textiles, those had suffered. It was India that came to its support even before the IMF had come to its support.
Exactly.
So we'll really have to wait and see as to how China also assesses. I think under the circumstances that China will come to some extent, you know, try to bail it out from its very precarious situation that
Yes.
Bangladesh finds itself in. But I think a long-term strategy, I would still imagine, you know, like you've seen Sri Lanka, you've seen Maldives, you've seen even now Afghanistan.
All that China will do, Ambassador Sajjanhar, is give loans, no write-offs, no grants, no aids, no write-offs, only more loans.
And exact is, you know, its consideration, exact its price from there. There are no free meals as far as, no free lunches as far as China is concerned. So
absolutely. You said that right, Ambassador Sajjanhar. I'm completely out of time. Thank you so much for taking out the time to decode
always a pleasure.
what's happening in Bangladesh.